It was the perfect crime, hidden in plain sight. For decades across America, young mothers were told their babies had died at birth. But behind hospital doors, those infants were quietly sold to desperate couples for cash, forged papers, and promises never to speak. Thousands of children grew up never knowing the truth, that they were stolen, not adopted. Before we begin this shocking true story, make sure you hit subscribe, because the secrets you're about to hear were buried for half a century. The delivery room smelled of bleach and fear. Mary, just 19, clutched the sheet with trembling fingers as another contraction split through her body. A nurse barked at her to push harder, while a doctor with cold eyes checked his watch, impatient. And then it happened. A shrill cry. A tiny, fragile sound that should have meant joy. But before Mary could reach out, before she could even see her daughter's face, the doctor nodded to the nurse. The baby was swept away into another room. "Where's my baby?" Mary gasped, voice breaking. The nurse avoided her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Your child didn't make it," Mary screamed. She screamed until her throat ripped raw. But no one answered, no one comforted her. The chart at the foot of her bed was already stamped with one brutal word: stillborn. Only the baby wasn't dead. Behind a locked door down the hall, the newborn was being wrapped in a fresh blanket, tagged not with Mary's name, but with a number. That number would soon be entered into a secret ledger, exchanged for cash, and paired with a waiting couple who had been told this was a legal adoption. The infant's first identity, her mother's face, her birthright, was erased in less than an hour. Mary would leave the hospital broken, haunted forever by the sound of a cry she wasn't allowed to hold. And her daughter, she would grow up never knowing that her very first lullaby was a lie. Mary's story was not rare. In fact, it was one of thousands. From the 1940s through the 1980s, a quiet network of doctors, nurses, social workers, and lawyers built what would later be called America's largest black market adoption ring. The scheme was horrifyingly simple. Vulnerable women, many of them poor, unmarried, or from strict religious families, were told they had no choice. Some were sent to maternity homes, pressured into giving up their babies for the sake of morality. Others, like Mary, were lied to outright. Your baby didn't survive. Behind the scenes, newborns were relabeled, their birth certificates forged. Money changed hands in manila envelopes, sometimes disguised as donations, to charities or medical fees. Adoptive couples were assured the process was legal, but in truth, they were buying stolen children. Hospitals were complicit. Certain maternity wards became known as safe havens for this trade. A mother could walk in with nothing but fear and leave with empty arms, her baby already en route to strangers across the country. By the 1960s, the network stretched across multiple states: Tennessee, Georgia, New York, California. Adoption agencies and lawyers operated like storefronts, but their real inventory was human lives. Some babies were shipped across state lines, others across oceans, and all of it was hidden under a thick blanket of silence, because who would dare question a doctor's word? Who would challenge a signed birth certificate? Meanwhile, mothers carried their grief alone, families buried empty coffins, and children grew up in comfortable homes, never knowing that their first chapter had been torn out and rewritten. What no one could imagine was that decades later, in an age of DNA tests and online records, the truth would come clawing back to the surface, and the lies would unravel, one reunion at a time. It started with a routine doctor's visit. Sarah, 39, sat in the sterile exam room as her physician flipped through her chart. He frowned. "Family history?" he asked. She hesitated. "Adopted," she said, the word Flat. Practiced. All I know is what they told me. My mother was too young, couldn't keep me. The doctor sighed. Well, without background, it's harder to track risk factors. You might want to try one of those DNA kits. Could help fill the blanks. That night, Sarah ordered a test. She didn't expect much, just a few percentages of ancestry, maybe a distant cousin. But when the results came back weeks later, her heart nearly stopped. The name at the top, Mary Johnson, parent-child match. Sarah stared at the screen, her hands trembling. A parent, alive, searching. Within hours, she found the message. A short, desperate line left in the DNA site's inbox. I lost my baby girl in 1965. They told me she died. If you are her, please write back. Sarah's mind spun. They told me she died. What did that mean? Who had lied? Who had stolen her story? She wrote back with shaking fingers. The reply came within minutes. I never stopped hearing your cry. In that moment, Sarah's world shattered. Her entire life, her name, her family, her history, was built on a fraud. She wasn't adopted, she had been stolen, and she wasn't alone. As Sarah dug deeper, she found online groups of others, thousands, discovering the same terrible truth. Their stories matched. Mothers told of stillbirths, children placed through shady lawyers, DNA tests connecting the broken pieces decades later. The black market wasn't just rumor, it was real, it was systematic. And Sarah realized she had stumbled into America's darkest adoption secret. Sarah sat across from the people she had called Mom and Dad her entire life. The living room was too quiet, the air heavy. Her adoptive mother twisted a handkerchief, her knuckles white. I found her, Sarah whispered. Her throat felt like glass. My real mother. She's alive. You told me she gave me up, but she didn't. They told her I died. Her father shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor.
Sarah, we didn't know. Didn't know, her voice cracked. You signed papers. You brought me home. How could you not know? Her mother's eyes filled. We were told it was legal. The lawyer said it was a closed adoption. Everything was in order. We wanted a baby so badly. She broke down, sobbing into the handkerchief. Sarah felt the room tilt. They weren't monsters. They were victims too, desperate, misled, blinded by hope. But it didn't erase the truth. Her life had been stolen. She pressed. Who was the lawyer? Her father finally met her eyes. A man named Dr. Hicks. He worked with the hospital. Everyone knew if you couldn't have a child, you went to him. No questions asked. That name would become infamous in her search. Dr. Thomas J. Hicks, an unassuming country doctor who, between the 1940s and 1960s, ran one of the largest black market baby operations in American history. Sarah's heart pounded. This wasn't just about her. There were hundreds of children like her, maybe thousands, and the worst part? Many of the records had been burned, destroyed, or hidden, leaving mothers and children with nothing but DNA tests and half-truths to bridge decades of silence. Sarah wiped her tears. I'm going to find them, she said. Every single one of us who was stolen. And I'm going to make sure the world knows what was done. The living room was still again, but this time it felt different, like the silence before a storm. Sarah's laptop glowed in the dark, her face lit by the blue light of the screen. She had typed Dr. Hicks adoption scandal into the search bar, and the results made her chest tighten. Headlines, forums, grainy newspaper clippings. A name whispered again and again, the Hicks Clinic, McKaysville, Georgia. It turned out Sarah was not an only child. She was one of an estimated 200 babies secretly sold from that tiny Appalachian town. They called themselves the Hicks babies. In an online group, the stories were heartbreakingly familiar.
They told my mother I died at birth. My birth certificate is a fake. Different hospital, wrong dates. I found 3 half-siblings through DNA. None of us knew we existed. Sarah scrolled through pictures, faces eerily similar, eyes that carried the same haunted look. They were strangers who should have grown up together, but instead had been scattered like stolen property across the country. Soon she was on a video call with a dozen of them. A grey-haired man named Robert leaned close to his camera. I'm 72 years old. I spent my whole life wondering why I never fit in. Now I know I was sold like cattle. A woman named Angie wiped tears. I don't hate my adoptive parents. They loved me. But every time I look in the mirror, I think, who was I supposed to be? Sarah spoke last, her voice trembling but steady. We can't change what was done, but we can tell the truth. Our mothers were lied to, we were lied to, and it's time everyone knew. The group nodded. Some cried, others clenched their jaws in quiet rage. For the first time, Sarah felt less alone. She wasn't just one stolen child, she was part of an invisible army, children who had been erased, now resurfacing. And together, they would begin to pull the mask off America's darkest adoption secret. McKaysville, Georgia, looked like any sleepy Appalachian town, rusting storefronts, a faded diner, a church steeple piercing the sky. But for Sarah, every corner felt like a stage where a crime had been performed in broad daylight. She parked outside what used to be the Hicks Clinic. The building was small, almost ordinary, with chipped paint and boarded windows. If you didn't know better, you'd never guess that hundreds of lives had been rewritten inside these walls. Locals watched as Sarah walked up the street. Some whispered. Others turned away. The scandal was no secret here. It was a shadow the town never outran. At the diner, she struck up a conversation with an older waitress. When Sarah mentioned Dr. Hicks, the woman's hand froze mid-pour. "You one of his babies?" she asked quietly. Sarah nodded. The woman sighed. "Honey, people here." They knew, not everyone, but enough. Women came in pregnant, left with empty arms. Then out-of-town couples would show up with brand-new babies, smiling like Christmas morning. Nobody asked questions. He was the doctor. Who were we to argue? Her words landed like a punch. Entire communities had looked the other way, comforted by the idea that Hicks was helping families. But no one stopped to ask who paid the price. Outside the diner, Sarah met Robert, one of the other Hicks babies, who had agreed to join her. Together they stood in front of the clinic. Robert whispered, "This is where it happened to us, where we were turned into merchandise." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine it. The cries of newborns, the shuffle of papers, the sound of cash exchanging hands. She opened them again, voice firm. "This building stole our beginnings, but it won't steal our ending." And in that moment, Sarah made a promise to herself, to her mother, and to every stolen child. The world would know what happened here. The first TV crew arrived on a muggy summer morning. Cameras rolled as Sarah stood on the cracked sidewalk in front of the old Hicks Clinic, her hands shaking, but her voice clear. "They told my mother I was dead," she said, "but I was sold, and so were hundreds of us." The story exploded. Newspapers dug through dusty court records. Television anchors called it America's stolen children scandal. Survivors who had stayed silent for decades suddenly found their courage. More and more came forward, voices breaking as they described empty coffins, falsified papers, families torn apart. Sarah appeared on a national talk show, seated next to her birth mother, Mary. The host leaned in. "Mary, what was it like to see your daughter after almost 40 years?" Mary's eyes brimmed with tears. It was like breathing again after drowning. She clutched Sarah's hand so tightly the cameras caught their knuckles turning white. Not everyone welcomed the spotlight. Some townsfolk muttered that Dr. Hicks had done good by helping childless couples. But Sarah refused to let the narrative twist. "Helping is not stealing," she said into the camera. "You don't heal one family by destroying another." Soon, law students offered to comb through surviving documents. Journalists tracked down forged adoption records. DNA sites buzzed with reunions. One by one, the puzzle pieces of a buried history started clicking into place. Robert, the 72-year-old Hicks baby, finally met his biological brother in a reunion captured on film. They embraced, sobbing, whispering the same thing over and over. "We found each other. We found each other." Sarah watched it unfold and realized this was bigger than her pain, bigger than any single family. This was about restoring dignity to lives stolen in silence. The truth could no longer be buried. The Hicks babies were invisible no more. By the time Sarah's story reached the front page of national papers, Dr. Hicks had been dead for decades, his clinic long shuttered, his name etched on a quiet gravestone. There would be no courtroom showdown, no prison sentence. That was the hardest truth for the Hicks babies to swallow. The man who had orchestrated their stolen lives would never stand trial. At a town meeting called after the scandal resurfaced, reporters crowded into a church hall. Survivors filled the pews, their faces raw with anger and grief. At the front, a local historian cleared his throat. "We cannot try him in court," he admitted, "but we can try him in history. We can tell the truth." Murmurs swept the room. Sarah stood, her voice steady. "We don't want revenge. We want recognition. We want the world to know our mothers weren't weak, our fathers weren't absent. We were taken, lied about, sold. That's our story, and it deserves to be told honestly." Applause broke out, not polite, but fierce, like thunder shaking old rafters. Journalists scribbled every word. Soon, lawmakers began quietly drafting resolutions. Some called for memorials. Others pushed for investigations into similar schemes across the country, because the Hicks Clinic wasn't the only one. New York, Tennessee, California. The pattern was everywhere once you looked. Sarah knew they couldn't put handcuffs on ghosts, but they could reclaim their names. They could make sure every certificate forged in lies was corrected with truth. One by one, survivors petitioned for amended birth records. Mothers who had been told to bury empty coffins were finally listed on their children's legal documents. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was a start. Sarah looked at her new birth certificate. Mary's name printed clearly in black ink. For the first time in her life she felt whole, not healed, not yet, but whole. And she swore no child, no mother would ever again be erased in silence. On a quiet autumn morning, Sarah and Mary stood side by side in a small cemetery in Georgia. The trees burned gold and red, and the air smelled of earth after rain. Mary laid a single rose on the ground, not on Dr. Hicks's grave, but beneath a new plaque erected by survivors. The engraving read, "In memory of the children stolen and the mothers silenced, may the truth live longer than the lies." Sarah read the words aloud, her voice catching. Around her stood dozens of Hicks babies and their families, faces once scattered, now gathered. They weren't just statistics anymore, they were living proof of a crime hidden too long. Reporters filmed, townsfolk watched, some hung their heads in shame, others cried openly. Mary turned to her daughter. "They stole you from me," she whispered, "but they couldn't steal the love I carried all these years." Sarah held her hand tightly. "And they can't steal the truth anymore." The crowd fell silent. as church bells rang in the distance. For the first time, it felt less like mourning and more like justice, not the kind that locks people behind bars, but the kind that sets people free. The stolen children of America were no longer shadows. They had names, they had voices, and they would not be forgotten. Even the darkest lies cannot stay buried forever. Truth has a way of clawing its way into the light, and when it does, it restores not just history, but humanity. If this story moved you, subscribe now. More hidden truths and untold stories deserve to be heard. Don't let silence win, because sharing is the first step toward justice.